Hi, it's Sarah with House Copper. I have had some requests on showing a build from start to finish, and there's a reason I usually don't do those, and one is because it takes a ton of time to do any builds from start to finish, and I really don't think anybody's looking for like a 2-hour video to watch this. But I think I can do it almost exactly, not 100% in real time, but really close to real time if we do something simple like biscuit cutters. And so that's what I'm going to attempt to do today. And the first thing that I do when I get a custom order and I get the dimensions is to figure out the pattern in the flat. So I'm going to be making a 4-inch biscuit cutter today, and I already kind of did the math, but up here you will see my pattern for it. And the way you figure out how long it is by taking the diameter, which is 4 inches, times pi, and then you add in your allowance for your seam. In this case, it's only 1/8 of an inch. So I'm ending up with 12 3/4 inch length. And then I know that I want the top to be at it's going to end up being a little under 1 3/4 because I have a 7/16 curl for my wire, but I'm going to cut a piece that's 1 3/4 by 12 3/4. That's my flat pattern for, just to kind of hurry it along, for cutting the piece that I need to make the biscuit cutter. I am going to use 20-ounce copper, which is the heaviest weight I can use without breaking my tools. And so the first thing that I do then is I go and I measure out the very flat piece, and I cut it on the stump shears. So without further ado, let's try and do this build from start to finish. All right, the stomp shears is, as I've used many a time in all my videos, a giant scissors. I have a piece of 20-ounce copper that is a 15 by 15 square. So I now need to cut my piece to 12 3/4 by 1 3/4 on the stomp shears. If you don't have a stomp shears, using a snips is fine. It's just going to take you a lot longer, and you have to be really careful not to create burrs as you cut. And if you don't know how to use a snips, I have videos on how to properly use a snips to avoid burrs. So just as a reminder, use the stomp shears. I cut a piece 12 3/4. Now I'm cutting the 1 3/4. I do use a ruler just to triple check my measurements. And there is this piece. Next, I take my little piece here, and this is actually a very standard type of pattern for creating a crimp seam, where you can use it for a lap seam. It's just my little jig, and I am going to use a scribe to mark where I want 1/8 in and 7/16 down for my wire and my lap seam. So this will accommodate the wire, and this will accommodate the lap seam. Here's a notching tool. You can do this by hand with a snips. You can also buy little notchers that kind of bite out the amount. I'm using that piece that I traced with the scribe. I'm sliding it in, and I'm going to just pop it. The reason you want a notcher, if you can find one, though these are vintage and hard to find, is because you end up notching your piece without any burrs right here in the corner or on the edges. But a notcher does well. Also, a snips is fine in a pinch. All right, now I'm going to wire the edge. I did a video on how to make sure that this knob is situated to either help you with a seam or with a wire on the top. So now I'm going to show how using it so that the curl is wider is perfect for wiring on the top. I don't want that tight of a curl. Let me make sure I have this adjusted, which currently I don't. There we go. It's so hard for me to kind of teach some of this because some of these measurements are constantly changing depending what I'm building, and depending on what you're building, some of these measurements are not going to jive. And so there's no standard official. There's stuff you'll use more often than not, but in reality, there's just a lot of different measurements out there that can be used. So like this was like a wider curl so that the wire can scoop underneath. I didn't want it too tight. All right, now I've measured from this corner to this corner, which is 12.5 inches. And I'm going to slide a copper wire. This is 3/16 inch wire. And this goes in right here to the edge. Ideally, you don't want it poking out like that because you have to cut it and sand it. So you want it to scooch just inside where it's not gonna poke out, hopefully. And you use a pliers to tuck the wire in like so. See how it's kind of tucked? And that actually gives you like an in with the wiring machine. If you don't have a wiring machine, you can do all of this by hand. You can tuck this under, you can use a hammer, and you can start to curl it by hand. It takes a lot longer if you have a wiring machine, which I do. This is what I do next. So I take my end, I tuck it right underneath here. I use this backstop, which is right there. You see that little extra here? That's my backstop. I'm gonna hold the material against it the entire time so it doesn't run off. I'm also not going to crank this too tight because it will actually end up hurting the metal, like creating a mark on it. And now I'm just gonna let this pull itself through. And as you can see, as this goes, it draws the wire underneath, so that's why I didn't have to do anything more than that. So this is gonna hit, there we go. That's a better view for you guys. I always wanna make sure I'm not going off. And because I'm using a much thicker metal than normal, I have to be very careful not to overdo this. Now that I've done it, I'm gonna back off my oh boy, like that little, this right here, that I'm gonna back off just a little, and then I'm going to run this through again, but I'm gonna do it at a 45-degree angle to tuck the wire just a tiny bit more. So instead of going straight, I'm actually gonna go up, and all it's gonna do is kind of finish off that wire. So anything that was bumpy down here kind of smooths out. So you'll see like this bump here will smooth out if you watch. It's not perfect. Oh, and I was not watching. I might run it through it again. There. Okay. Now we have a wire. It's been curled directly underneath, and it's not perfect, but it's good enough for the next stage. Now I'm gonna shape this. Now you may ask, like, why didn't I curl it ahead of time on the rollers? The rollers actually would have made my job a lot harder right now. So when it was flat, if I rolled it first on the rollers, made it round, then in order to wire it, I would have had to solder it first, run it through the turning machine, then prep the turn, then wire every single thing by hand, and then run it through the wiring machine. So it actually still, even though I now have to shape this by hand into a circle, it still saved me time to wire in the flat, which is why I did it that way. So that's why even now, and I will use only rawhide so that I don't scratch the metal, and the copper wire under here is not very stiff, so I do have some control over that. And I am going to slowly turn this into a 4-inch circle. And if you notice, I'm going bit by bit so I don't kink anything. And I'm only hammering the wire. I am not hammering the body. If I were to hammer the body, I'd get dense. I'm only using the wire to shape the rest of the metal. So at this point, you're really only ever gonna hammer the wire and never anything else. Now, it's not gonna be perfectly round, and that's okay because we're gonna use a different tool to make it round, but I'll probably keep messing with it. Just a tiny, until my seam overlaps like that, and it's nice and snug. Now, using like surgical scissors, I guess, or whatever, I have created this lap seam here. So see how these two areas meet? There's no wire hanging out. It's just inside of the bead there. And what I really want is I want to see, for as thick as this is, the copper, how flat that seam is there and how flat that seam is there. And that is the goal with this. And then now what we're going to do is we're going to solder this, and we don't even need to use a soldering iron, but what we do need to do is use a small piece of tin, and I'm going to flux it. As always, the links for flux and solder are in the video. I really don't want to see anybody going like, where do you get it? Read, please read, it's there. I place the piece of solder in there, and I will do nothing but use my blowtorch to melt along the seam. Obviously, the handle of this stays cool enough long enough. Go. It's melting and not going where I want it to exactly, which is annoying, but there we go. Actually, I'm going to show it to you when it's done. But it didn't run, which is what I wanted. All right, so we soldered it. All I did was wash it with like Dawn dish soap and water to just clean it off. This is just discoloration that'll come from when I clean it again. Everything is set to go, except as you can see, it's not very round, and your biscuit is going to not be perfectly round. So that's where the last tool comes in. Now you can make these out of wood. You can buy them out of wood. You can also get them out of rubber, and mine is made out of rubber. And this only goes a specific diameter. They come in all different sizes, but they're cones for shaping in this case. This is another time where I'm going to emphasize very, very importantly that you do not hammer on the body. You will create dents and marks that won't come off. The copper will stretch, the crystalline structure of the metal will expand, and you will not be able to like contract it again. That's just how it goes with this. So I'm going to still use a rawhide hammer because I don't want to scratch the metal even on the rim here where the wire is. And I'm going to slide it on here, and I'm going to straighten out my not round circle. Slide it on. Best way to see if it's round is to kind of look at it and go, oh yeah, it's not like flush here at all. As you hammer, it's going to sink further down because it's going to become more round. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hammer here. And if you can see where my hammering face is, I can't because I'm over here, but I'm only going to hammer right on the rim. I'm not going to hammer up here. That's not going to make it round. Only thing that's going to make it round is hammering on the actual wire down here. And that's A, it won't dent, and B, it's actually going to form the body. So I'm going to go in circles, and as I go, it's going to kind of sink further down. I'm going to use my hand to kind of push as I go to encourage that rounding that I want so that the body and the wire is round. And it's just round and round you go. And then you can always pause and look and see how nice and tight it is or where it's not. For instance, I can see it's still sticking up here, so that's where I want to hammer. If you can aim just for the wire, and you know you're not going to miss, you can be pretty aggressive with your hammer strokes. Keep hitting things here. And I'll keep checking. All right. Good. All right. Hopefully you can see it's nice and round now. Okay, so here is a circle and it is round after using our shaping piece, but that is basically building a biscuit cutter, cookie cutter from start to finish. And hopefully this was helpful for people who kind of want a vibe for what goes on inside the shop. I do have classes that I host once or twice a year. The spots are extremely limited. It does mean you have to come to Wisconsin. I try and do it when the weather's good. But you're able to build like at least 3, if not 4 or 5 things over that 2.5 to 3 days. Stuff like this, but also a lot more complicated than this. And you have access to the tools from the 1700s, 1800s. So if this interests you at all, I would love to have you here. But otherwise, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe this channel, or pick up Copper, Iron, and Clay wherever books are sold. Find me on Facebook and Instagram under House Copper, and I will see you in the copper shop next time.